welcome back, everyone. If you're new here, thanks for joining us. This is the Passes Podcast. I'm Natalie.
I'm Bridget.
And I'm Macy. Now let's get started, why don't we?
Yes, let's. So today, Macy's done the research and will be presenting her topic to Bridget and I.
And we will be asking questions along the way.
That is correct. But first, let me ask you guys a question. How familiar, if at all, are you with the Arab Spring?
Yeah, I would definitely say that, I know generally, broad themes and things about it, but specifically, no, I don't think that I'm very well versed on it.
I really actually know nothing, to be frank with you. I think some of the names might sound familiar that you're going to talk about, but I really don't know much, so.
We're just ready to learn.
Yeah,
Yes.
You can learn with the audience, hopefully.
Yes.
You'll learn at least something you didn't know.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give a quick overview. So the Arab Spring itself refers to a set of protests in the Middle East and North Africa that occurred first in Tunisia in 2010 and ended up spreading to other countries in 2011. These protests were responsible for the toppling of some governments and civil wars in other states, but we're going to get into all of that in a moment. First, let's start at the beginning in Tunisia. Up until 2011, Tunisia was ruled by a guy named Ben Ali.
That name sounds familiar. Had he been in power for a long time? Or?
Yeah, so Ben Ali had been in power since 1987. So he was a president for life. So
yes,
yeah,
okay.
A long time. And the protest against him began at the end of 2010. They began with a self immolation, so setting oneself on fire by a street vendor named Muhammad Bouzizi. This sparked what would become known as the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia.
Mm-hmm.
So the motives behind these protests included high unemployment, poverty, and political repression. So after taking power, Ben Ali did what any good authoritarian leader does and suppress any political opponents.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
So these protests sweep across the country. They're met with pretty violent suppression. The official death count from the Tunisian government that was released in 2019 equaled about 129 deaths from these protests.
Wow. That's interesting that they released that document in 2009.
Yeah,
this happened
so
in
much later.
2011, and then they just released the death toll in 2019.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why, but it is pretty interesting.
That is weird. Yeah.
So these protests were actually successful in ending Ben Ali's time in power. So on July 13th, 2011, he said that he would work to better the government and wouldn't seek re-election at the end of his term, but that wouldn't be until 2014. And funny enough, I don't know if funny is the word, but only 24 hours later, January 14th, the Tunisian government was actually dissolved, and Ben Ali ends up fleeing to Saudi Arabia,
Wow.
where he will live in exile until he dies in, I believe, 2018.
Oh.
The Tunisian government had actually they did charge him
Oh, they did.
with corruption, embezzlement, but Saudi Arabia refused to send him back. So yeah.
Wow. Okay.
But the ideas of the Jasmine Revolution, they spread pretty quickly. So only 11 days after Ben Ali flees, the Egyptian government begins having protests against it. These protests called for a more democratic government, economic reforms, and an end of corruption. So kind of same themes we saw in Tunisia.
Mm-hmm.
And just as Ben Ali had done in Tunisia, Mubarak, the president in Egypt, who had been president for 30 years at this point, so another president for life.
Seeing a trend.
Yeah, this will be a trend. He violently suppressed the protest as well.
Okay.
But interestingly enough, the security forces of Egypt, so the military, ends up refusing to go against the protesters. They refuse to shoot at them as Mubarak wanted.
Interesting.
So he ends up stepping down because he doesn't have anyone to really help
Enforce.
him out.
Right.
Yeah. He leaves office on February 11th. Again, we're kind of seeing just how fast these protests are being successful, at least these first two, giving an insight into just how large they were.
So speaking about the size of the protests, how large were they, and how do people organize in such a profound way?
Yeah, this is a really great question, Natalie. So I'll answer the second part first. Social media actually played a huge part in the ability for these protests to get organized in such a large way.
Mm-hmm.
This is 2011, so a little bit of an older social media than we know now.
Sure,
so
yeah.
Facebook was a really big part of these protests.
I am still a Facebook user. I know you guys don't
I don't
use
have
it
it.
much,
I know
but
It's fun to look at sometimes. It's fun to look at.
I enjoy my Facebook.
But I do feel like it definitely still is relevant for a lot of people
Mhm.
today, but I feel like it's been overtaken now by Instagram.
Yeah,
if
true.
we
Yeah.
think of if this were to happen in any way today, I feel like it would probably be over TikTok or Instagram.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
But at the time, Facebook was
Oh, yeah.
the app.
Okay.
So that's what they were using to organize. And so on size, the protests in Egypt were larger than Tunisia just because population differences. While a definite number isn't exactly known, in Egypt, protests were believed to be as large as hundreds of thousands of people. In Tunisia, protests included tens of thousands. Interestingly enough, in Tunisia, the protests actually started in rural areas and moved to the city.
Interesting.
In almost every other case, this was the opposite. In Egypt, started in Cairo, I believe, so started in cities. And then in Bahrain, which I'll talk about more later, up to, it's believed, 60% of the population participated in these protests.
Crazy.
So, I guess to go off of that, like Tunisia and Egypt weren't the only places that we see these kind of protests. You just mentioned Bahrain.
Yeah, they aren't the only places. These protests spread to other countries in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa. They spread to Syria, Libya, Bahrain, and Yemen. Unlike the protests in Tunisia and Egypt, these protests don't produce the same results, so they're not as successful if you're looking at it in that way. In both Yemen and Syria, the events of the protest actually lead to civil war.
Oh, yeah, I see that connection now.
So the Yemen civil war didn't actually begin until 2014, after a rebellion against Hadi, who had been the vice president during the Arab Spring, but becomes the president because of it. The civil war is actually still going on. I'm sure you guys have heard of like the Houthi rebel group based in Yemen. They control most of the western side, including the capital. The Syrian story is a little different. While like other examples, the protests broke out in 2011. It was inspired by those by Egypt and Tunisia against the al-Assad regime, who was president of Syria, president for life. His father had been president. Again, another
adding
theme.
to the trend.
Yes. He, like Ben Ali and Mubarak, tried to cracks down on these protests, but he does have the support of the military, so he cracks down pretty hard. And soon the international community is quite concerned about like the human rights abuses that are occurring at the hands of the Assad regime. While other factors are at play like economic inequality and religious differences, Assad is part of the Alawite minority of Syria, so like that's a religious sect. And the military was as well, while most of the population is Sunni Muslim. So Assad's repression of the Arab Spring leads to kind of the civil war in a way based on that as well. A devastating civil war. While every civil war is not good. The Syrian one was pretty bad. The Assad regime uses chemical weapons on its own people. It imprisons and tortures thousands. The current death toll is estimated at 656,000 people. As I'll talk about in a minute, the civil war has just ended. They're finding new mass graves actually, like currently. So yeah, pretty bad. And the civil war is causes a huge refugee crisis. I'm sure you guys have heard of. We're still seeing the effects of today.
Yeah, so I remember the Syrian civil war being sort of my like introduction to like international politics at like, I don't even remember how old I was in like 2014, 10 or 11.
You would know that.
I don't remember. 11. I was 11. But I remember seeing this on the news and this sort of being like of course, like international events like happened before. I was like cognizant.
But like an impressionable
Yes,
age.
but this was certainly like impressionable on me. And like some pretty like intense images coming out of the Syrian civil war.
It was devastating.
I remember like very distinctly, even being so young. And I remember reading about the end of this rather recently. The war just ended.
Yeah, so the civil war actually just ended in December of 2024, so 11 months ago. Of course, with the destruction on the scale seen in Syria, it will take time for the country to come together. I don't think anyone exactly knows what's going to happen, but things are definitely looking up, I would say. There are still some non-state actors working in the region, but again, I think things are looking up. And the civil war ends when the rebel being those against the Assad regime, ended up basically making him flee. He flees to Moscow.
Yeah, I remember this. This is an interesting part of the story for sure.
Yeah, he's still in Moscow as far as we know. Nobody knows exactly.
Today, as of right now, he's still in Moscow. Yeah. Allegedly. Who really knows?
Yeah, so you've talked about like how the Arab Spring played out in Yemen and Syria, but what about the countries that you'd mentioned earlier, like Libya and Bahrain? Like, what happens there?
Yes, thank you for asking this, Bridget. So both countries' stories in regards to the Arab Spring are really interesting, at least to me. The main importance in both of them is actually international intervention. As I mentioned earlier, Bahrain saw a huge amount of protesters, like 60% of its population. Unlike the other states we've talked about that had these presidents for life, Bahrain actually is under an autocratic monarchy like the Gulf states. So Bahrain, like Syria, took a very harsh approach to the protesters. Again, another big theme of the Arab Spring.
Autocrats are known for that.
Yes, they are. They don't tend to love protest against them.
For
in their
sure.
government. So early on in the protest, Bahrainian forces, they actually bulldoze and destroy like a square known as the Pearl Roundabout where people are like camping out to protest. Like 7 people die as a result of this. Yeah, not great stuff. But a few weeks later, Saudi Arabia actually sends troops to assist the Bahrainian government, and they end up crushing the protest.
So why did Saudi Arabia send the troops?
That does seem kind of random.
Yeah, it was when I first read that, I was like, okay, like this is kind of odd. So there's kind of 2 reasons. The first, these forces were part of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. So they were there to ensure that oil fields still had access. Oil is a big
that makes a
thing.
lot of sense.
Yes, oil is always
very,
important.
very valuable.
And the second is also because Bahrain is like one of the only Gulf states that has a majority Shia population. While Saudi Arabia has a majority Sunni, they do have a big Shia minority, and so they wanted to make sure that minority wasn't getting inspired by these protests to rise up against the Sunni majority.
Okay. So foreign intervention was essential in keeping the Bahrainian monarchy in power. You mentioned foreign intervention played a key part in what happened in Libya during the Arab Spring. Did this look like what happened in Bahrain?
It did not look like what happened, but this is a great question.
Okay.
This is a great question. So yeah, foreign intervention was used to basically ensure the survival of the Bahrainian monarchy. In Libya, this intervention was used to end the regime. So the protests in Libya started in February of 2011. 2011 was a big year.
Yes.
And they called for Gaddafi, president for life, to step down. He had been in power for 4 decades.
Wow.
Apparently you live very long when you're an autocratic president.
Yeah. You cannot get rid of them.
Cannot.
The point.
Yes. Like many other countries you've talked about, Libyan forces used force against the protesters. Pretty violent force. And the increase of this force against its own citizen, like in Syria, drew attention from the international community. As the violence continued, the UN Security Council actually voted to impose economic sanctions on Libya and the Gaddafi regime. But eventually NATO forces used airstrikes to cripple the Libyan military and Gaddafi holdings. By August, rebel forces take the capital, and Gaddafi would go into hiding for only a few short months, where he's found and killed in October of 2011.
Okay, so Libya basically had its own like miniature civil war as the result of the Arab Spring.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to sum it up.
So now that we've heard about all these countries where either the protests were quite unsuccessful, like Bahrain, or caused a small or a massive civil war, like Libya, Yemen, and Syria, what about those quote-unquote successful uprisings that you brought about at the beginning, Egypt and Tunisia?
Yeah, so let's revisit our first 2 countries. Thank you, Natalie. So yeah, these are the first 2 countries where the Arab Spring arises, and I'm going to put it pretty bluntly. Egypt's story is not a great one. They do have elections. The Muslim Brotherhood ends up winning these elections, but only 2 years later, in 2013, there's a military coup. So the military takes power again. And then in Tunisia has been seen as almost the Cinderella story of the Arab Spring. Like the one country that had change, got rid of the leader, didn't really have as much violence as we saw everywhere else. But in the last few years, we've seen like a backsliding there as their president, Said, has really centralized his power, and it seems authoritarianism is really retaking root in the country.
Yeah, okay, so like if we were to put it simply, there were many ways in which the Arab Spring didn't actually bring long-term successes in countries, even ones where it looked like it had succeeded, like Tunisia.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to see that on one hand, the Arab Spring didn't lead to the end of authoritarianism in the MENA region by any means. But it's still a really important event in many ways and changed the region for both good and bad. And I think we can take a lot of lessons from the Arab Spring and apply them to things we see around the world today.
Yeah, so bringing that kind of back to my favorite part of these episodes, which is the drawing connections piece to either other historical events or to what we see in modern day. like off the cusp, kind of like what do the events of the Arab Spring remind you guys of?
Yeah, I will say like the immolition, like mentioned, definitely harkens back to the Vietnam War class that we took, and there was a Buddhist immolition there in a square. Was it like?
Yeah, I don't remember. It was
I
an
don't know
open
where, but it was
area.
an open area,
Yeah.
and it was an active.
There's like
protest as
photos
well.
of it that were
Yes.
super popular.
And it was a very like jarring way to protest, and like that being kind of mirrored here as like one of the only tactics people can use to sort of really show their revolt against something or someone. And then something else that I kind of drew a connection to was the military siding in Egypt, siding with the people rather than the regime. And I just was doing a little quick like review on World War I, post World War I with Russia and the beginning of the Russian Revolution and throwing the Tsar out. Actually, a women's bread march and a women's suffrage march actually turned into this like anti-Tsar march, and they marched to the Tsar's castle, and the Tsar ordered the soldiers to fire at this group of women, and they actually sided with the people they defected, and just shows how much power, and that led to the monarchy in Russia dismantling completely.
Yeah.
And it just shows how much power you really have when you have the military on your side versus when you don't.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I've like heard of this topic before, but I'm currently in a Middle Eastern politics class, and that's kind of how it got brought back around.
Right.
And we talked at length about how the military's reaction to the protest had a big part in what happened in the country. So like in Egypt, when they're like, well, we're not going to shoot people, okay, now people are like, okay, I'll go out in the street because my life isn't necessarily in danger. But in Syria, like an already repressive regime is like, now like I'm gonna kill you. Like you're seeing like, okay, I'm gonna fight because what else do I have to live for? And you're kind of seeing the civil war there. And so yeah, the military had like a really important role in how these played out.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Something else that I think is like more recent, so I'm not very educated on it at the moment because I do think we're still kind of seeing the effects, but within the last month there have been a series of protests in Nepal that have been kind of mainly led by Gen Z, which is, what do we decide on, 18 to 20 or something?
Yeah, it's like
25?
late teens to like 20s.
Yeah, so mostly young people leading this sort of uprising or protest against their government. They burned down their parliament building.
Yeah.
And eventually their prime minister, I think, resigned. So I guess tying that back to like the role of like social media here, and then like the role of young people as well. Like, is there anything that we can kind of say about what that role was?
Yeah, so again in my class we talked about this idea of waithood. We talked about it specifically when talking about Egypt as like a case study.
Yeah.
And it was this idea of like, so economic inequality had grown a lot in Egypt leading up to these protests. And so like unemployment for young people I believe was at like almost 30%.
Wow.
I believe it was around that.
Yeah.
So young people didn't have money, they didn't have jobs. And in Egypt, typically to get married, you have to be able to buy an apartment for you and your wife. So young men didn't have money to do that. So you're not married, you don't have a job, you're not really tied to the regime in the way that maybe older folks are.
Sure.
So and then add in the social media aspect of it, you see other people are as discontent as you are.
Right.
And you have nothing really holding you to the regime, you're more likely to go out and protest it.
Yeah. And with these protests in Nepal, the protests were over the banning of TikTok, right?
Yeah, social media platforms.
Social media platforms, just kind of in general. Yeah, I think this is an interesting, like, and you know, we talk about in the U.S. a lot, there's kind of this looming threat of, like, will the government ban TikTok? Like, what's going on there?
Do you remember when they did?
Yeah, for like
Yes.
one day.
Yes,
Terrible
for
day,
one day.
terrible day.
Lost it, yeah.
Yes, and so, like, that, I don't know if we would, like,
Take to the streets.
yeah, I have a hard time believing that. I mean, when they did shut down TikTok in the United States, it was sort of like,
We all just went to Instagram to complain about
Or
it.
people got like what was it called, Red Note?
yes, the other one. Although, to be fair, this is just one media platform that, like, we used. And I think in this case, it was all media platforms, which is a, like,
very different
thing, and, like, a way to kind of establish, like, keeping people in the dark and, like, not having access to information, which I would hope that people would, you know, be like, hey,
That's
can't
not
do
good.
that.
Yeah, I don't know a lot on this, but I know recently there's been Gen Z protest in Morocco, actually.
Oh, I haven't
They're
heard of this.
Gen Z 212, I believe is what they're called.
Oh.
I don't know if they were inspired necessarily by Nepal or if they happened first, but they definitely have been, like, you're seeing, like, a correlation there of young people, and I believe it's, like, economic problems as well as, like, political suppression.
Oh.
So it's, young people are still around the world.
Yeah.
Didn't something just happen in Madagascar? I feel like
You're way more educated on this than I am
feel
right
like
now.
there's been some. Yeah, I won't say too much because I don't know a lot, but
Something
I'm
to
pretty sure
look
there's
into.
been. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I haven't just made that up and we have to go back.
Well, speaking of
kind
what... No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It kind of relates in, the things started in Tunisia.
Yeah, and they spread.
And I'm assuming that this is kind of what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
The people in Morocco and Madagascar are inspired by what happened in
Yeah.
Nepal. It's kind of a snowball
Especially
effect.
when you see that what happened in Nepal, like what happened in Tunisia, was successful
Yeah.
in their goal of, like, I mean, at least in Nepal, I don't know if, like, they're changing the government structure, but their prime minister resigned, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, like, that, in that way, it was successful. So you're more inspired to do something because you're like, worked there.
Yeah.
Why can't it work here?
Yeah. Sort of just like a one-off question, but you mentioned that we saw, like, Western intervention in Libya, but not in Syria. Thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
I don't 100% know why that's the case.
Sure.
I find it, when I was, like, doing my research for this and, like, even in class when we were talking about all this, found it really interesting because I would say that the Syrian government's crackdown was much harsher than the Libyan government's.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very interesting to me to see that we did not, I mean, I know we did some intervention, but not on the scale of, like, ensuring the end of the Assad regime like we did with the Gaddafi regime in Libya. My thought, I know Russia really backed the Assad regime, as we can see, as he's now chilling out in Moscow.
Yes.
So that could have a role in it.
Sure.
But yeah.
Yeah, who knows, like, behind the scenes what
Yeah.
was going down.
I don't know, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of mirror what you think. Like, it's kind of unexplainable for sure, but you can definitely see, like, international factors that you could probably point to as a result.
Yeah. Ditto.
Yeah.
That's sort of all of my questions. Bridget, if you want to
I did have a couple. I'll go over the second one that I had first just because it kind of relates to what we were just talking to. So, like, looking at the role of international intervention in moments like these, like, is there a responsibility for external forces to get involved, or is self-determination the doctrine that should be followed? What are our thoughts?
She's giving us the hard-hitting questions on
I'm
Tuesday
sorry.
afternoon. Yeah, I mean, this is so difficult and, like, really relevant, I think, to certainly American foreign policy as, like, the global police force, the, like, the free world is essentially at, like, our hands and our fingertips. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
this is
complicated.
a-
Really
there's not-
complicated.
I know that
complicated.
there's not, like, an answer to the question that I'm
Yeah.
asking. Like, it's subjective and it's like
Mhm.
way more complex than, like, I'm making it sound out to be. But
Yeah, I think currently in American politics, there's a few things that, like, are playing out in front of us that are interesting case studies, and I'm going to try to be as diplomatic as possible when I discuss this. One of them is the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, and the other one is the Israel and Palestine conflict. The United States is supplying both Ukraine and Israel with military aid, essentially. There are people that argue that the U.S. should be giving no aid to no one whatsoever, which I don't agree with. I think that's an unreasonable explanation or expectation, that we would just, like, back out completely.
Yeah, we've
and
kind
go
of seen
back-
how isolationism.
Right, like,
works towards.
right.
Yeah.
We are well aware of the faults of isolationism, and I don't think that that would be, like, a reasonable step for the government to take, nor do I think that they would. The other piece of that is, I mean, you have to deal with the discussion around what is happening in Israel and Palestine, and I think that's been really relevant with young people in our generation and was very relevant in the last election cycle.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess the election cycle before that. And that there are people that think that that the United States should not be funding Israel whatsoever. And then there are people that say we should be funding everything that they do, including perpetuating a genocide in Gaza. So again, it's really complicated. My personal opinion is that the aid that the United States is sending to help perpetuate a genocide is not aid that we should be giving.
Yeah.
However, I agree with the aid that's given to Ukraine. So it's a really nuanced issue that I don't feel like I have a good answer
I
on.
feel like there's not one overarching doctrine you can apply to every international issue ever. So
Yeah.
there's definitely nuance to it.
Yeah. Any other
I
thoughts?
know this is somewhat related. We were talking this morning about the current Sudan crisis and how we see the U.S. fund and is really allied with the UAE, who themselves is funding rebel groups in Sudan, who is committing a genocide basically in the country, and how we the U.S. isn't really doing much to go against or say anything against that, and how definitely we see the U.S. choose to get involved in things that are more beneficial for them, but not in things that tend to be beneficial for them or their allies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this conversation is around just there's a lot of questions of ethics and morality here that I just don't think we have time to get into. But
you don't want to talk about every ethic in the international system right now, Natalie?
Yes, let's unpack it. I do think that I do think the United States has a responsibility to step in some instances.
I don't think you can be argue that you're a world police force on one hand and then not do the things that a world police force would do.
Call yourself the leader of the
free world. Or even if it's not
then...
U.S. itself, international communities maybe.
Yeah,
the UN.
But if you are going to take on that role of the world police force, you should be protecting people.
And there's a responsibility that comes with the
people,
title.
not resources necessarily.
People, not resources.
Which,
love that. New tagline.
The U.S. does love the oil, so
Yes.
it's hard. People,
Common theme. Okay, the second question, the last question I have, is how do we measure the success or failure of a revolution or an event like that? Is it short-term, long-term, exact objectives being accomplished, or just change being felt at all?
This is a good one.
You really were going in with the hard-hitting questions. You were thinking.
I love a revolution as a case study, so this is a great question for me. Of course, do you guys have a favorite revolution?
We were talking this morning, and me and Bridget spent a lot of time learning about the Haitian Revolution last semester.
Yeah. Other than that,
and I didn't know much about it before, and I would say pretty interesting revolution.
Yeah.
Shout out Toussaint.
Yeah.
You seem pretty cool.
My favorite is, of course, the American Revolution. If you guys learn nothing from this podcast, you will learn that I love American history. The American Revolution, I think, is a fabulous case study of it's a successful revolution in the sense that the cause completed and attained its goals. The goals were accomplished.
Yeah, definitely.
But I don't know. Do we measure a revolution by its accomplishing its goals? Because you could also argue with the United States that the Articles of Confederation fell apart after we won our independence. We also had a civil war. Things weren't peaceful. Things weren't always going the way that the founding fathers intended for them to be. You see George Washington warning about factions, and here we are with two parties that can't agree to open the government. Or there's a lot.
We saved him.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying completely, and I think that a lot of that has to do with the scope of which you look at it. If you were to look at the success of the American Revolution while you're living under the Articles of Confederation, you're gonna have a very different view than if you're looking at it from our perspective or anyone after the Articles of Confederation. So a lot of it is definitely short term or long term, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we can see that here that maybe it's been 15 years, but in the grand scheme of things, that's pretty short term.
Right.
Being the Arab Spring was a failure. It didn't really enact regime change. If anything, maybe it created more destabilization.
Yeah, you got
it. Okay, in the region. Sounded wrong when it came out. But I think there's also a chance that in 15 more years, maybe we'll look back and be those protests inspired something that happened later.
Yeah.
Syria, I think, is a perfect example of this. If a year ago we would have gone, the Arab Spring was terrible for Syria. They were already obviously living under a pretty rough regime under al-Assad, but it got worse during the Civil War.
Yeah.
But now, things are better than they were,
For
you
sure,
know,
sure.
and hopefully on the up, looking up.
And
I mean, we have the president whose name I don't have on the top of my head, but
the
like,
current one?
yes, the current one, visiting
Can't help you.
Donald Trump, I believe, at the White House soon, if he hasn't already, which I believe is the first Syrian president.
Shara, maybe?
Shara.
We'll
go with
Al
that.
Shara,
Al
yeah.
Shara.
Yes.
We'll go with that.
I believe he's the first Syrian president to ever visit the White House.
Interesting.
So, like, obviously, yeah, now looking back, maybe in a really, really rough period in the middle, but in a way, the Arab Spring was successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it
And
just
the,
goes back to when you look at something.
In the same way with Tunisia, like it was a success. It
Yeah.
sparked everything, but
And
now
now
you
it's-
said recently
Yeah.
backsliding. So it's all, I guess, relative to
Yeah.
what time you're talking about or
And-
speaking from.
Yeah. Well, I've learned a lot, Macy. Do you
Me
have
too.
any final thoughts that you want to share with us kind of on this topic?
I have like just a quick few things to
for
bring
it.
up kind of that we see as a result of the Arab Spring, more current politics. Obviously the growth of non-state actors since this has been a really big thing.
They push this in our classes.
Yes,
This is
yes,
a big thing.
non-state actors.
Yes.
You
Deterrence
believe-
and non-state
Yes.
actors.
We might know nothing else, but we know those.
Yes.
Yeah, so ISIS obviously comes to power a little bit after this, which stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, I believe, something along those lines.
More than I
Bridget,
know.
look it up. But they come to power after this time. The Houthis become more powerful because they're
Mhm.
also being funded by different groups.
Right.
Today in my class, actually, we were talking about how like there's like a new Cold War in the Arab world, like Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia, Iran, like, so there are still a lot of current political events going on in the region that are kind of stemming back from this.
Right. Well, this is so recent. I think that's like one
Yeah.
of the main points that we want to like give away. Essentially, is that like because this is so recent, like we're still kind of watching this unfold in a
Yeah.
way,
Mhm.
and so that's a good point.
It was weird to research something that like I was
Yeah.
technically alive for. Like I don't remember. We have a friend Mo who's from Egypt,
Mhm.
and he like remembered seeing this like on TV, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's so like you remember what I'm for our history podcast what I'm writing about.
Yes.
It was really interesting. We don't typically
Yeah.
look at things when we're alive, so
Yeah,
it was
cool
really
when it
fun.
happens,
It
right?
was. Yeah, so I agree. I think we're seeing.
The
Yeah.
rise-
Yes. I don't.
I know where
Lost
you're
that
going.
there.
Yeah, the rise of non-state actors is certainly something that we will
Mhm.
be talking more about in like contemporary politics for sure. We see that
Yeah.
a lot.
Especially in these VT classes.
Yes, yeah.
And then my like last point was just I mentioned earlier the refugee crisis that resulted from
Yeah.
Syrian civil war. We see how this influx of immigrants, especially into like Europe, really leads to a rise in right-wing politics
Yeah.
in both Europe and kind of in turn we know how the West is connected in America.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the biggest maybe legacies of this for the West
Sure.
because we're only concerned with ourselves. But yeah, that definitely those refugees had a huge role to play in the rise of like nationalism, I guess you could say, also white nationalism in Europe and in America.
Yeah, I think that's a really unique connection to draw. It's certainly jarring to see sort of this rise of far right-wing nationalist ideas coming out of these like really, really devastating conflicts for these communities, and that is just it's really jarring that that's the consequence that these communities are facing after going through what they've been through with these violent protests.
Yeah, I mean, we saw just recently like basically an anti-immigrant protest in the UK. Obviously not all dealing with Syrian refugees, but like these anti-immigrant, anti-refugee sentiments have really like been more prominent since this issue. And I think this also brings up issues of how the international community deals with refugees. I don't have any answers for you there, but like seeing that there's not really systems in place
Yeah.
to help people who need it, I guess.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. There's a lot there that is like really hard to deal with on like an international scale, but is a very real consequence of conflict and civil war. Really.
I'd like to end on a happy note though.
Please.
So I will say though, I think the Arab Spring itself is a great example of how, even if change isn't enacted necessarily, collective like mobilization is possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big lesson to take away from this. Like, even under these like presidents for life, these autocratic regimes, like really harsh autocratic rule, like people still were able to come together and protest, and even if it wasn't successful, they were able to do it. And I think that can be hopefully a note of hope for the future. I would like to think.
Yes. Yeah, I love leaving on a hopeful note.
Yeah, don't want to leave too down and depressing.
Yes. You guys have anything else to add before we kind of wrap up?
No, I think you did a great job, Mason.
Yeah, this was very educational.
I had a really fun time.
Learned a lot. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Pastors podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. We will be back shortly with a brand new episode for you all to watch. If you're watching this on YouTube, check out our Spotify. You're watching this on Spotify, check out our YouTube. We also have a blog on Substack. We write about a lot of the things that we talk about. There's like a plethora of articles for you to check out. So we hope to see you over there. Thanks so much for tuning in.